You're listening to Tonebenders, the Sound Designers Podcast. Let's do this.
Welcome to Tonebenders. My name is René Coronado, and with me as always, it's Tim Muirhead. Hey, Tim.
Hey, René, 100 episodes. This is awesome.
100. And of course, it's Teresa Morrow. What's up, Teresa?
I'm good. How are you, René?
I'm doing awesome. I'm so pumped up about the new music. The new music makes me happy.
We are going to get into the nitty-gritty of our new music in a future episode, but we don't have time to talk about that now because with our 100th episode comes a freaking amazing giveaway for all of our listeners.
Yes, it is an awesome giveaway. Teresa, why don't you tell us what the prizes are for this giveaway?
There are 5 prizes. The 5th prize is from Sound Radix. It's a license of PowAir, the radically smart compressor. 4th prize is from iZotope, and that is a license of RX Standard, the complete toolkit for audio cleanup and restoration. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. The 3rd prize, again from Sound Radix, is a license of Auto-Align Post, which is the fast and simple way to get location mics in phase. Pretty awesome piece of software there.
Yeah, that one's fun.
The 2nd prize, also from Sound Radix, a license for Auto-Align Post and the Radical Bundle 3. The Sound Radix Radical Bundle 3 includes all 5 of the studio plugins, Auto-Align, Surfer EQ, Pi, Drum Leveler, and PowAir, and as I said, also a license for Auto-Align Post. And finally, the first prize, the grand prize, is from ProSoundEffects, and that is the Odyssey Collection Essentials. Odyssey Essentials is a general library with over 16,000 sound effects curated from over 250 films worked on by Academy Award-winning sound editors Mark Mangini, our guest today, and Richard L. Anderson.
Oh my God, those are some awesome prizes. I have the Odyssey Collection Essentials, and I used it all day today, actually. I was editing a show, and it saved my bacon. There was a shot in the show of someone shaking their glasses, but it had to make noise, like eyeglasses, and it had to make noise, and I found the perfect sound in there, and I was positive I would never find that sound, and I was going to have to make something up and get in the Foley booth, but I just found it quickly because the metadata in it is awesome, and I love that library. And René, you are familiar with Auto-Align Post, right?
Yeah, we use that in dialogue editing all the time because what you can do with it is you can take a boom and a lav and basically with 2 clicks, phase align them and really lock them in. And we've talked about that with some of the dialogue editors in the show. And it's just so key to make certain interesting things happen. I've been using it in my field recording also because sometimes I'll just do weird 2 and 3 mic setups and I can phase align multiple things. It's so simple and it opens up possibilities for multiple mics up in different distances from sources that kind of didn't exist before. It's great.
Yeah, and then we also have obviously the iZotope RX that we're giving away, which I think we all can't live without. It's a life-saving piece of software for sure. So we want to thank Sound Radix, iZotope, and ProSoundEffects for donating these prizes. We really appreciate them. Go out there and support the companies that support us. We really appreciate it. But I guess before you go buy any of these, see if you can win them first.
How would you do that? Let me tell you. Here are the rules. All right, we need you to send an email to enter@tonebenderspodcast.com, enter@tonebenderspodcast.com. The subject line of your email must be giveaway, GIVEAWAY, all one word. In the body of that email, you must give us your name and an email address where we can contact you if your entry is selected as one of the 5 winners. You could also use this opportunity to tell us which of the 100 episodes is your favorite Tonebenders episode and tell us why. Or share an idea for a future episode that you have in the back of your head that we haven't done yet. That would be great. We would appreciate your input. The winners will be selected at random from the eligible entries. We will accept only 1 entry per submitted email address. We will pick the winners on May 29th and contact the winners via the email address provided in the entries. So the winners will have 72 hours to accept the prize, after which, if we do not get a reply, we will pick a new winner.
Okay, in order to win the ProSoundEffects, you have to live in a country that FedEx delivers to because that comes on hard drive. The rest, licenses will just be emailed to you once you win. Now, if you're tired of listening to all of that or you fast forwarded through it, go to www.tonebenderspodcast.com to the page for this episode, and all of the instructions on how to enter are there. If you want to do us a big favor, help us spread the word about this giveaway. Let everybody know about this episode and the giveaway that's going along with it. We would really appreciate getting the word out there because we're really proud of this episode. We're also proud of the 100 that came before it. So we would love people to that don't know about the podcast to hear about it. And we think this is a really good way. So tell your friends, maybe send out a tweet. Be awesome if you could tweet out what your favorite episode of the first 100 was. That'd be pretty great. Other than that, just help us spread the word. That's all we ask in return for this giveaway.
Sweet. Let's get to the interview with Mark Mangini.
Something I found about with sound people is we kind of love to complain a lot. I'm guilty of this as much as anyone, and we often are the last step in the process, so we rarely have time or resources that we want to have. But there are also some great and profound joys to be found in this line of work, and I feel like sometimes we need to pause every now and then and celebrate these moments. If you go back to our 50th episode, we asked listeners to send in their greatest stories of audio glory, and we had a really great episode listening to those victories, and we want to repeat that kind of thing with our 100th episode, but put a little twist on it. So instead of asking listeners, this time we asked former guests to send in clips of their favorite audio triumphs. So some of them are talking about aha moments when they were early in their career and they decided that, oh, this is for me, I'm going on the right path. Some of them are later in their careers where they've sat back and were like, yes, I did make all the right choices. I'm glad I am where I am. So today we have clips sent in from Ethan Van der Ryan, Richard King, Sylvain Bellemare, Paul Davies, Nia Hartstone and John Warhurst, Mildred Iatrou Morgan and Ai-Ling Lee, Erik Aadahl, Skip Livesey, and sitting in with us today to listen to all these clips and gab about them with us is the great Mark Mangini coming in for a returning champion stint on the podcast. Welcome, Mark.
Oh, thank you. I'm in August company.
Your episode that we recorded 2 years ago is one of the ones that gets spoken to me and quoted back to me the most. So thank you very much for doing that then, and thanks for sitting in with us again for this 100th episode. I think it's going to be really fun.
Thanks.
So the first set of clips we're going to play are Ethan Van der Ryan and Richard King. We're going to play them together because they're kind of talking about similar events. And then once we hear them, we will see what similar events we've had in our careers.
When I was first starting as an effects assistant, I was up at Skywalker Ranch. We started working on Terminator 2. So my job was really to go out and gather recordings of everything we needed for the film. It reminded me of what I loved most about being in film school and making my own little movies, which was really the process of going out into the world, record sounds, and just reacting to the situation that was going on around me in a sort of cinema verite kind of style. And there's a certain amount of seat of your pants, kind of like, okay, this is not happening the way I expected, but I'm going to be able to be flexible and react to it in a way and get some amazing recordings. Gary Rydstrom was the sound designer on that movie. And he said, Ethan, why don't you take this scene and start working, with some of the sounds that you've recorded and see how that goes for you. And it was completely magical, that kind of alchemy that you get to be a part of and create something new in a way out of what feels like nothing. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, this is going to work for me.
And Richard King?
After I graduated from college in Florida, I moved to New York City and just kind of got my feet wet and tried to find work, tried out a few different things, and landed a job with a guy, one-man shop, did documentaries, shot them, edited them. We took them to a stage and we mixed them. And so I was able to try out a number of different areas in film. I was his camera loader, I was his gaffer, I was his assistant editor, and ultimately his sound editor. He let me cut the sound on a documentary that he was cutting about the building of a dam in Brazil, one of the biggest construction projects in the world at the time. It was all MOS. I just pulled a bunch of sound effects and started cutting them, and it was amazing footage to begin with. But what really impressed me was the fact that seeing it with sound was a completely different experience. It had depth, it had scope, it had an impressiveness that it didn't have before. When I put my sound editor hat on, I could do anything. I was only limited by my imagination and how hard I wanted to work on it. As far as adding subtext and adding sense of place and all the things that are important in film, it felt like I was kind of creating a painting of these moving images that I had in front of me. And I really just latched onto that.
So those are two stories about kind of the first time they found the magic of adding sound to picture. What was your first time doing that, Mark?
Well, my first? Well, oddly, when I was 15 years old, I was playing in a band, and we went down into my bass player's basement, and his dad was one of the early research scientists on reel-to-reel tape recorders. And he and I put on a radio play, and somehow I became the sound effects guy, spinning in sound effects from records. Now, this was all as a sort of a little sidelight to being a musician in a band, and it was a one-off. I didn't even know people do those kinds of things for a living. And 4 years later, I moved to Los Angeles, not even remembering having done that. And what's the first job I get?
Wow.
It's bizarre. And I only know this because I had no memory of the moment, but my friend was rooting around in his now grandfather's basement, and he found the reel-to-reel tape that his grandfather had made surreptitiously. And now I am in possession of my first work.
How awesome is it?
It's awful, but it shows great youthful exuberance.
Do you have your first work, Tim?
When I was in high school, I was in charge of making the commercials that went over the PA system in the morning. So that when the announcements happened, if there was a school play or something coming up, I would make commercials. And the first one I did was for the Halloween dance. And I took my Meatloaf Bat Out of Hell record, and one of the songs starts with a spooky voice saying, "Would you offer your throat to the wolf with the red roses?" And so I had to do it all live. I had no multi-tracking, and I would play that, and then while I was queuing up the next thing, I would start reversing it slowly. So it would go, "Would you offer your throat to the wolf with the red roses?" And then I'd start reading the copy. October 31st, high school dance, Halloween, do the Monster Mash. And then I'd hit the Monster Mash or some baloney like that. That was the first one I did. By the end of the year, I got pretty good at it. But that first one, I remember I did 300 takes, and it was simple. It was 2 records and a voice going to cassette. But yeah, I was nervous because I realized that everybody in the school would be hearing my voice for the first time over the PA. And that didn't help the situation. Teresa?
I can't remember anything like that. My first on tape was I volunteered at a college radio station when I was in high school, and that put us in what they call closed circuit, which just broadcast down the hallway to the men's bathroom. So that was my first audience.
Nice.
René?
When I was in school, my final project was a song that I wrote called "Greasy Lovin'," and I still have it.
Wow.
On DAT. Up in my closet somewhere, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to retrieve it again.
Yeah, DAT machines they just rip apart DATs now, all the ones that I have, because they haven't been on for so long.
They just don't do anything. I was lucky I didn't leave it at D88.
Oh, it's going to have to remain a figment of our imagination then, what that song sounded like.
I think the title says it all. It was it wasn't bad, though.
The clip from Ethan Van der Rijn, when he told me that, he's been on the podcast a couple times now, so I feel like I can mess with him a little bit. And so he said that, and then he stopped, and I went, "It's so great that you've come so far from your humble beginnings on Terminator 2.
That's what I was thinking.
And he just looked at me like, "What?" And then he got that I was joking with him. But at first he thought I was being mean, I think. But yeah,
that's a nice first gig.
Yeah, it's a pretty sweet gig.
That story from Ethan reminded me of a similar one in my own early days, except not nearly as profound. My mentor was the great Richard Anderson, who won an Oscar for Raiders of the Lost Ark and would be my partner for many years. And early in my career, Richard took me under his wing, maybe much as Gary Rydstrom had taken Ethan under his wing, and gave him that great opportunity to work on Transformers. Inversely, Richard gave me my first opportunity on a very lowly, schlocky Canon Films horror movie called Heckle and Hype. And the opportunity it gave me was unique because it was instructive to me early in my career. At around 11 p.m., we were working very late together, and he had to go home, and a reel was due on the mix stage the next morning, and he was just done, and I was the young kid, and he handed me a box of sound effects, and he said, "Here, Mark, cut reel 3." And, it was a box, an old film box. A lot of you, I'm sure, are listening to this and don't know what I'm talking about, but sound used to be physical, and it had sprockets. And he handed me a box, a very limited palette of sounds to use. It might have been 20 sounds to cover an entire 10-minute reel. And the point of this is that necessity is the mother of invention. Given very, very limited resources, other than the sounds that he had given me, I had to make something happen in a scene where a man was in a jail cell and hearing something happening off camera that made him frightened. And I got good feedback from Richard the next day. He said the mix went fabulously, and he loved the juxtaposition I had created of sort of untoward elements that had no kind of right to be in the same mix together, but created a sense of, what the heck is that going on off camera? And so the takeaway for me was sometimes self-imposed restrictions creates great art when you have the guts to do it. And I've had this argument with Randy Tom about this many, many times.
What's Randy Tom's perspective?
Well, I told him about another thing that I do when I'm struggling to find a sound, and that is I play library roulette. I'll close my eyes and open my library browser and type, ABXYL, and whatever sound comes up, I compel myself to use it somehow. That's another form of enforced restriction. And now I'm doing Randy an injustice because he came back to me with his opposite approach to doing that, which was sort of the open universe of sounds that you can use, but I don't remember exactly how he does it.
You actually provided an excellent segue into our next set of clips when you were talking about your mentor, because the next two clips are both people talking about their mentorship that they had. First up, Sylvain Bellemare, who was on episode 83 with Bernard Garipi-Strobel, and they were talking about Arrival, and Bernard's father was Hans-Peter Strobel, and he was kind of the icon of Montreal sound back in the day, and he took Sylvain under his wing. And so this is Sylvain talking about how important Hans-Peter was to the Montreal scene.
I would say that Hans-Peter was different than others in sound people. The fact that he was from Europe, and I remember when I started, I really connect with him about his temper, because he was from a different culture. I will say sound people are only interesting by sound and technology. And Hans-Peter has a way bigger culture than that. And he was somebody who knew cinema and stuff like that. So he was able to connect with different things. At the end of the day, if you're just a very good technician, it's really not enough. So Hans-Peter really brought that culture. If you're sitting with him next to the console, you have to be there. You have to be concentrated. He can laugh a lot, but he was also a personality that things have to be done in the right way. Sometimes the pressure was really high in the mixing room with him. But it was his background. It was the culture at the time. He was born in the 40s, in the continent when everything was upside down. So he came from that strong culture of living, and he had this passion. His passion was really high. He was a fantastic person. But without Hans-Peter, things would have been different. Yeah, he brought a certain quality to it. And Bernard today for me is the best recording mixer. So it's interesting how you can pass some legacy to things.
So that was Sylvain Bellemare, and then this one is going to be Paul Davies. He's also talking about kind of a mentorship situation. Paul was originally on episode 95 talking about the Lynn Ramsey film, You Were Never Really Here.
When I was doing my graduation film in the National Film and Television School here in the UK, at that time, we're talking about 25 years ago, within the National Film School, there was very much the aesthetic was towards a certain naturalistic approach to sound. The gods were Bresson, Tarkovsky, Bergman, Hollywood sound design, if I'm using Hollywood in quotation marks, was sort of frowned upon. Sound calling attention to itself, overt sound design, was probably sort of something more suitable for animation, perhaps more than the films that were lauded were films that had direct sound, quite subtle, minimal sound effects. My graduation film was very different, and I remember putting all this sound design, spending weeks in the studio, those days manipulating 16-track and quarter-inch tape, and I had all this sort of very heightened psychological sound, which I just hear the voices of my fellow students not approving. And there was this tutor who came in, a visiting tutor, Tom Priestley, who's an editor. And he came in and I showed it to him, and I respected him as an older editor, a very experienced editor. And I showed him what I've been doing because I was nervous about it. I thought it was too. I said, "Is this too much, Tom?" He said, "No, this is great." And he started relating, and I hadn't realised this, his experience of sound editing Roman Polanski's Repulsion. And he told me about that and the techniques they'd used on Repulsion. And I suddenly thought, I have permission, authorization to do this. I have approval, direct line from from something, perhaps I shouldn't have needed that, but it was validation. So that's a moment that stands out for me. And yes, I'm on the right path.
How important to get validated by somebody that you look up to in the industry. It's funny how much you don't give yourself permission to do things sometimes until other people tell you it's okay. I did a lot when I'm working with voice actors. I'm not an actor, but so often I tell them to give themselves permission to, give me everything that they need to give me, especially, people that are coming up or when I'm doing their demos and we're doing that kind of stuff. It's super, super important to validate people that look up to you, for sure.
I've had so many, it's interesting, I consider myself mentored by every great director I've worked with. I'm sure all of us have, you're not paying attention if you're not taking away something special from every experience you have on a film. Each filmmaker brings some unique perspective that you didn't have before. I decided, my first job was as a cartoon editor at Hanna-Barbera, and I was just working stiff. I didn't know anything about sound design or that this was even a career somebody could have until I saw Star Wars. And then I realized the light bulb went off. That's what I want to do. And I discovered it was this gentleman named Ben Burt, and he had designed and recorded all these sounds. And he became my sort of guitar god. I have guitar gods because I'm a guitarist, but he was now my film sound god. And as fate would have it, 3 years later, I had the opportunity to work on Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I had great moments with Ben, albeit few, where he would sit me down and we'd talk about what I had done on the reels I had been working on, and he was extraordinarily supportive. Even when I did things that he maybe didn't anticipate or hadn't ordained, but he liked the sort of the pluck that I had that I had taken initiative. And so, yes, of course, it's essential to have a mentor that gives you positive feedback and point you in a direction that leads to some new creativity.
René, who would you say your mentor was?
I mean, it's a little bit weird with me because I'm out here in the middle of the world. And so, Roy, my boss, he hired me and did a lot of teaching of, how to not screw things up. But in a broader sense, I was kind of left into my room to be my own devices and also to a large degree to kind of be my own critic for a long time. And so it's a kind of, on the creative side, especially on the sound design side, I've been swimming on my own since the beginning. I don't feel like I have had the luxury of having a strong mentor constantly on top of me, evaluating and critiquing the sound design creative work I'm doing. I've had Roy, busting my chops on mixes, from the beginning. But
Hey, René, I'm curious, what's it like for you when you go see a film you've worked on in the theater? Are you able to be your own best critic? Or do you get feedback from your peers when they see a movie you've worked on in the theater? And how does that
really tough.
How's that loop work for you?
It most of the time, I'd say the majority of the time, it's kind of not a loop. I have a handful of people that I really, really trust with regards to what their opinions of things are. But a lot of those people are like Tim. and they don't get to see most of my work. And so it's real easy for me to put some stuff out and have everyone be high-fiving me, and then I'm sitting there going, man, that was cool, but I could have done this differently this time. It's tough. I feel like I've done a lot of growing in the last several years since we started this podcast with regards to my self-analysis and my self-critique, because I kind of have to do it on my own. I have a coworker, Brad, and he's been the guy that I really do bounce a lot of stuff off of now, because I really trust his ear and I trust his aesthetic, and it's been important to find somebody in my vicinity, because I'm in a unique situation out here.
I had a really weird memory just a couple days ago that kind of ties into this area of mentorship. He wasn't a mentor for me, but one of the first series that I mixed for television was a show called Loving Spoonfuls. And the idea was this guy, this very charismatic young man, went to old folks' homes and got grandmothers to teach them their favorite recipes from their old country. It was a very low budget show, but the concept was good. But every once in a while, we would have to do ADR for it. And he would come in for screenings, and I would always mix the ADR too low because I wasn't confident in it. It didn't ever feel right to me. So my internal way of dealing with it was I'll try and slip it by making it a little lower. No one will hear it if it's... And he sat me down once, and he had no reason to do this. He had no vested interest in my career or anything. And he was just like, you're trying to cheat. And you can't cheat on this show. This is my show. He was an award-winning editor in Canada. He'd worked on some big shows. And this was his first director job. And he was like, this is my show. You can't cheat, and I'm not going to let you skate on this. So don't just try and lower it and think I won't notice. Like, you got to do it right. And then he'd go away for 45 minutes, and I'd have to get it back and make it right. And he did that to me on a couple other occasions. And that was a real eye-opening thing where, like, I'm making real work here. This isn't school anymore. I got to actually do it right. And at the time, I was kind of pissed off at him, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, I was like, no, he did the right thing. And I just learned a lot by getting through that grinder. Yeah.
Yeah, I still kind of struggle with that when I'm mixing. When, like, another mixer walks in the room, I'm always like, I kind of, sometimes I just find an excuse to stop mixing and like do something else because it just makes me nervous. But I know I have to work against that tendency and just be like, this is what I'm doing. If you have something you want to say about it, say it. I'm open to the criticism, which I am. I'm always open to the criticism, but I still struggle with that. Like, I'm just waiting for them to hear me make a mistake, basically.
Yeah. I would say, though, that it's a great luxury to have somebody that you trust to come and put an ear on stuff and even to watch your techniques, because what's happened to me in the past is I'll get a client in the room behind me and they'll be like, I want more, I want bigger, I want you to do this. And I'll be like, I'm throwing the kitchen sink at this, man. I've got babies screaming, I've got tornadoes, I've got everything, and you want me to crank it up 6 more notches. I will have not figured out in my brain how. And if I had somebody there that was like, no, man, mute all of that stuff and make this thing happen, then I wouldn't have to learn that lesson in the room with the director behind me,
Teresa, you said something really interesting. Well, I have, and maybe we all have, hi, my name is Mark. I'm a sound editor. I have what in psychology they call imposter syndrome. I'm deathly afraid that I've managed to trick everyone for 43 years. And so last week I began to mix. I'm supervising the sound on this film, and I'm mixing it as well. And we brought in the dialogue mixer was a well-known and highly regarded sound supervisor that I love. But all of a sudden, I got nervous because one of my own was in the room. I've never been terrified to present my work to the biggest and best directors in the world. But when I had one of my own in the room, I thought, what's he going to think of my sounds? What's he going to think of my work? And I was terrified. Is that crazy?
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy, but we all go through it. There's no avoiding it, for sure. Yeah, 43 years in and you're still doing it. That's almost depressing, actually.
I don't know. It's like tiny exercises in courage when you're just able to just say whether I'm doing this right or whether I'm doing it wrong. I'm the one who's doing it, and I have to put it out there and just not be afraid. Or be afraid and do it anyways.
I've played guitar all my life, and I've performed, not very often, but I've always had a mantra before I go on stage, which is, I am a guitarist. I am a guitarist. I am a guitarist. And I do the same thing when I go to the first day of a mix or a spotting session. I'm racked with insecurity, and I say to myself, I am a sound editor. I am a sound editor. I really do this.
So, Mark, when you take somebody under your wing, like, what are you looking for in the person? How are you trying to teach them?
I think I'm looking for someone who has a sort of very broad set of storytelling skills. The last thing I'm looking for is technical skills. Someone who knows plugins or someone who knows the keyboard shortcuts and Pro Tools. Those are way, way, way down on the list. I'm looking for somebody who, I think like all of you three, like you're out in the field, kind of like what Ethan talked about, that magic moment when you're recording one thing and you hear another thing. It's like, oh, what was that? Turn it over there. And you capture something and you're all giddy with excitement. I can't wait to get back to the cutting room because I'm going to use this for the transporter beam or some silly thing like that. I'm looking for that kind of crazy enthusiasm for sound. A person who genuinely gets excited about hearing, a blender and realizes what that could be.
What do you think about what Paul was sort of saying about people being cine literate? Like people who know their film history really well and come from kind of sort of know a lot about art, know a lot about film,
right.
know a lot about music.
Well, I must say I have an immense amount of jealousy for filmmakers as well as sound designers who are cine literate. But to me, that's like 10% of the package. If you're cine literate, it means on the film you're working on, being creative because it's a callback to something clever in another movie is only good for the other cine literates in the room. So in a way, to be beholden to that is to kind of marginalize the audience or kind of restrict your audience to maybe a wider palette of things that you could do. For me, ultimately, we need to be storytellers first. Don't create, these sort of self-imposed ideas of cine literacy and other things are a way of maybe restricting how we might approach telling a story. And that's where we have to get to first.
To go off on a tangent from that, something that I really picked up from when you were talking to Paula Fairfield and Nia Hansen was pointing out that they each have their own projects that they are in charge of. So Nia's a writer and Paula is a painter, I guess. And so when you're doing that kind of stuff, when you have your own projects, because when we're doing sound for TV and film and other kind of stuff like that, we're collaborating. It's not our vision. We're sitting there serving someone else's vision for the most part. And in order to make our own creative decisions and develop our own creative tastes, sometimes it really does help to have our own projects that we're running on our own. I see this particular podcast as something like that for me. I do some other kind of writing and I release sound effects libraries and that kind of stuff too. And so those things are things that no one else is calling the shots but me. And so I kind of get to make my own decisions there. I feel like having another outlet that feeds into what you're doing in a broad creative sense really, really does help when you're sitting there deciding what sound to cut in.
It's René, kind of jumping off of what you just said, I find that my success has come as a consequence of my ideas. And I find that I am hired for my point of view. And I am hired and paid to bring that point of view. Right. I think that's often forgotten in that natural sort of stage fright fear we all get of presenting an idea to our filmmakers. Yet I know that the greatest filmmakers are hungry to hear what I have to say or we have to say. That's why they hired us. They want that unique perspective and they want that pushback. When they have an idea, they want you to be at least the one person who says, interesting idea, but what about this? Because ultimately that's true collaboration. And that's what filmmaking is all about, is collaboration.
Well, and so it's so important to develop a point of view, right? And my thought was that by doing my own individual projects, that helps me develop a point of view that I can bring to a collaborative process.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it also keeps your brain healthy. I think that intuitively. Pursuing other creative interests makes sort of a more elastic kind of brain.
So let's move on to our next clip. This one is going to be Nina Hartstone and John Warhurst, who just won the Oscar, actually, for Bohemian Rhapsody. And they were on our show in episode 94. And here's a clip of them talking about one of their greatest moments of their career.
Now, I think being in the final mix with Brian May and Roger Taylor, and to have them sort of be so kind of pleased with the end result. I couldn't believe that I was actually in a studio with Queen to start with, but to have them pleased about the results that we'd created that really was amazing.
I think maybe when Brian May walked into the room might have been one of mine.
Yeah. Yes. Brian loved Nina. We did a session doing All Right with the original singer, Tim Staffel. And Nina was there because we wanted to make sure we got a good match to picture. You had a very good comment. Brian was he was so thankful that Nina had come to the session. I think he forgot about everybody else at the session and was just so pleased that Nina had been there to make this one comment she made, which did actually improve Tim's performance and made it match the screen performance we were trying to match to.
It was basically about taking a breath at a particular moment in the phrase of the song, just so that it matched his lips better. That was all. It was just an ADR comment, really.
And that's how you won Brian May's heart.
Brian May noticed.
And we're back. So that's kind of a cool story about something really small, like just having them take an extra breath, and that made all the difference in the world to, in this case, Brian May, but directors and such like that. And sometimes it isn't the huge sound effect explosion moment. It's the little tiny detail that you can put in that changes everything.
My good friend and Academy Award-winning mixer Chris Jenkins likens the work that we do to what goes into making a pointillist painting. A pointillist painting is made up of thousands and thousands of tiny little dots of color or not color, and every one of them has a significance. And so it's the attention to that minute detail that makes a greater whole, I think, that is something worth pursuing.
The thing about that whole episode that stuck out to me, I mean, the whole process of what they did for that film is the lengths that they went to get every single moment. I mean, playing the whole concert back for the extras over and over again and catching every single reaction and getting the whole crowd to sing in sync with every single live shot of that final concert is a massive effort of a lot of people. And it was 100% in the name of sound. And it was very inspiring to me to see that and then to sometimes measure my own efforts on things against what people are actually doing out there.
Well, it's funny. Back to something, I think it was either Sylvain or Paul Davies was talking about sound calling attention to itself. Often, we call ourselves sound designers or sound artists or, whatever. There's many titles we like to take. And I suppose in that we presume that our job is this additive process, that sound design is something you add to what you already have. And I want to maybe dispel that a little bit. It sort of ties into that idea of sound calling attention to itself. Often some of the best decisions are the ones made to not have something. We shouldn't be seen as the cats who bring in the rumble and the screechy sounds, the sounds that draw attention to themselves. We should always have a sound aesthetic. We should be sound aesthetes in that at every moment in a project, we should be the voice that says, here's the way that moment should work. And it works with X, Y, and Z, or X and Y, or Z and X. And to make that point, you always have to be remembering that it's what's on the screen that is most important. It's not your work or the thousands of hours you spent recording those pig, screeches. It's right. Because you might actually, as I have done, said at that moment, no, doesn't work. And you got to swallow it and say, this is what the movie needs. But in a way, it doesn't. What it really is you sort of getting in touch with your inner artist. In a way, we all have to pretend like we're the director and say to ourselves, how should this scene work? Simple question. Not how should sound work, how should this scene work? All right, what supports it?
Yeah.
A lot of times when we've had guests on, we've asked them what kind of sound supervisor they are. Are they the kind that sits up on the board between the mixers, or do they sit in the back of the room and wait for the mixers to come up with their version and then make comments? And I think that the answer that we've got most often is that as people's experience grew, they became more and more the person at the back of the room that let the people do their work and then came in. And I found with my own career, that's something that I took a long time to learn. When I first was cutting sounds and then I would see what the mixer was doing, I was like, no. This sound is the most important sound at this moment. Go play that. And now I just sit back at the back of the room, and when they play back, if it works, it works. And I'm happy if they, took out the sound that I really, really loved. If it works, I couldn't hear what the music was doing. So let the music play there. But that's definitely something that takes a while to let your, I don't know if ego is your thing. Yeah, it's an ego. You got to let your ego down a bit to let the greater good prevail.
I like those moments in the mix where you've got, I don't know, our mixes are a little smaller, but like maybe 2 or 3 people in the room, and everything's up or things are coming up, and everybody like has that look on their face like, oh yeah, no, you're going to take that down, you're going to put that in. Yeah, we're all in agreement. We're all in agreement of what needed to happen right there. And I always kind of like that moment. It's like, how could we all have had the same idea at the same time? But we're all like, that's correct. It's just kind of a neat thing when that happens.
Yeah, sometimes the picture tells you what it needs. Like, you just do what the picture tells you.
Yeah, and it's not till everyone is sitting there looking at the screen in that one moment where you're just like, oh, yeah, okay, let's just do that. And everybody is in agreement.
It's fascinating to me that kind of alchemy that occurs on the mix stage. I have a fairly large design studio with a 20-foot screen and a projector and a console and all the toys at my disposal. And yet even in that environment, when I go to a dub stage and you're on a 80-foot screen or whatever it is at a big dub stage, it all of a sudden feels different and new ideas crop up. What is that? Has anybody analyzed that?
Like somebody's watching, and it makes a difference, or other people are watching, and it makes a difference to your own perception. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely you suddenly see it through someone else, or hear it through someone else's ears. I was going to say see it through someone else's eyes, but I guess both.
I'm more referring to this jump in size. The size of the screen seems to, for me, psychologically impact how I'm receiving all that information, and it changes my point of view. I'm just curious about that. Have you experienced that?
I've experienced that for sure.
For sure.
Well, and a lot of what I do is for sporting events, right? So I do things for the Dallas Stars, and so I'll be in my little room, and I'll make everything kind of bang and crash and do all of its cool stuff, and then I'll go stand in the middle of 18,000 people, and we'll all go watch it on the Jumbotron at the same time, and that's different when you do that.
How fun!
And sometimes it's the best thing in the world, and I'm just up over the roof. And sometimes I see one thing, and I'm like, "Ooh, I did that just wrong."
Don't you just hate that?
Yeah, now it's stuck. That was the one time anyone's going to see it. So, were there moments like that when you're doing Blade Runner, when something just totally shocked you with the size of it, when you moved onto the stage? That movie sticks out just as such a big film to me, just with regard to the scope of what the sound was doing and how much room it was given.
Well, that's a testament to Denis Villeneuve. When we came on the film, and stop me if I said this in the last interview, but Denis' first words to Theo Green and I were, my co-sound designer, compose with sound. He had an intention, 2 intentions. One, to build the sound of the film during the edit, which is non-traditional, so that the sound informed the edit, not music. I'm talking about sound, such that if we could achieve a sense that sound carried a moment along with the drama and the script and the acting, we wouldn't need music in X, Y, and Z spots in the film. So by the time the composers received the film from us, from Joe Walker, the film editor, we had a pretty complete track, and Theo and I had a pretty good idea of what this movie was going to sound like, such that they could then achieve objective number 2. And that was have the blends or the seams between music and sound be unrecognizable, so that it all felt like, and I use this term, one soundtrack. What we had was simply the sound of Blade Runner. It wasn't music, it wasn't sound effects, it was just, that was the sound of that universe. And I think we achieved that through Denis' collaboration and encouragement to use sound evocatively and sort of narratively in a way. And in many moments of the movie where you would expect there to be score, we were doing it with sound.
Yeah, for sure.
So, that gives us some pretty free reign. My early experiments on Blade Runner were done divorced from picture. Because Denis had said compose with sound, I went off and designed kind of sonic landscapes that were more like, musique concrète perhaps. They were tonal, not sometimes melodic, but not particularly, but certainly in that sort of netherworld of, well, it's not a sound effect, it's not music, it's just Blade Runner. That's what I was trying to create. And I made this huge palette of sounds. And then I took the entire film, and it was 3 hours 45 at that time, and I kind of splashed sound on this empty Pro Tools canvas like a Jackson Pollock painting, and just watched what happened, where these random sounds that weren't designed for any specific sync moment, where they landed and how they operated and what they evoked. And I kept the things that worked, and I tossed out the stuff that didn't, and that began to form the basis or the foundation for the sound that we would add later on.
That's wild. So did you just roll off a dub of that, or like?
Well, it was all in a Pro Tools session. I would fill a region list with 100 sounds that Theo and Dave Whitehead and I had made. All extemporaneous, flowing, ambient, musical, melodic, tonal stuff. Sometimes these cues were 10 minutes long because we were improvising on samplers or keyboards or whatever, just creating weird ambient soundscapes. And I just grabbed something from the region list, and kind of like my Wheel of Fortune library browsing, I would kind of blindly grab a sound. I didn't remember what it was, if it was shrieky or rumbly or musical or pretty or dark or angry, and I would drop it somewhere on the timeline, blindly, I was literally thinking Jackson Pollock. I just wanted lobs of sound to land somewhere, and then I wanted to react to that. So I would watch how that 10-minute weird composition landed somewhere in the 3 hours. I would watch that and think, what did that do to that scene? Did it work with it? Did it work against it? Did it work because it worked against it? Great. That means something. I just unlocked a clue to that scene that I didn't have before because I created a heretofore unknown connection that I didn't have. Okay, that's pretty good, but you know what it needs. All right, I'm going to grab another thing, and I'd throw it on the canvas, the empty Pro Tool. And it was literally a 3-hour Pro Tools session, and things were just landing on tracks. And I'd start trimming and editing and EQing and reverbing, and before you knew it, over the course of about a month, I had shaped an abstract canvas that was 3 hours and 45 minutes of Blade Runner. And they hit on some reels, one little 10-second moment. Other reels, entire 10-minute swaths covered with this sound. And then I would play those for Denis and get his sort of, his reaction, his narrative reaction to that stuff. And we'd sculpt some more.
Were you starting and stopping, or did you watch the whole thing down?
Oh, we could never digest the whole movie at once. It
seems like it would be almost self-hypnosis if you.
No, we'd always watch just scenes together, really.
Yeah, but as far as when you were doing your creative process, though, when you had the whole film in front of you and I
never watched it. No, this is part of my process. I had watched the film once, and then I wanted to go with gut instincts, because you only get gut instincts once. You get one shot at that. Like, you only get to watch the movie once and be honest, have an honest reaction to it. So I watched the movie in its entirety and then sat down without looking at anything and started making my impressions of the movie.
Gotcha. That's great.
Yeah, that's
I'm gonna do that.
Definitely different way of working than I'm used to. I wish I could do that. No, I guess I'm gonna maybe I'll try that on the next one.
Well, look, I don't get that kind of opportunity that often, and that technique doesn't lend itself to very many movies.
For sure,
quite honestly. Which is to say, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to find an approach like that. I'll probably never take on the Jackson Pollock approach ever again. But the next movie, I will approach it wondering, what's my style here? What's my approach? Here's an important concept for me. I recognize that, especially when I look at my sound library, the universe is at my disposal. But if you allow that to be the case, you become immediately overwhelmed. You have to define a universe. You have to create some kind of parameters around which you are going to work. Otherwise, you can't function because there's too many options. So that was one that I had used on Mad Max. When I saw Mad Max, I took a literary approach. The first thing I thought of when I saw Mad Max was Moby Dick, because I saw the war rig as the great white whale, and I saw Immortan Joe as Ahab chasing the whale. That gave me all the narrative fodder I needed to find sonic metaphors along the way. It was my guide to point me in the right directions when I had creative roadblocks.
I think that comes back to what Teresa was saying before about being artistically broad enough to have other influences that you can draw on as you're doing your work, though. If you've read Moby Dick, then you can make that connection.
Yeah, but Moby Dick is probably not the only allegory that you could use. There are other books that tell similar stories of the pursuit of a nemesis.
Sure.
I just happen to know Moby Dick. So you don't need to know Moby Dick or even be that.
No, but you got to know something.
You do.
You know what I mean?
You have to be willing to associate. It's about having an associative
and an open mind
faculty or whatever it's called. Yeah.
I think that's one of the fundamental components of creativity is free association. It's when the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You connect, one disparate idea with another, and that fusion becomes something bigger than what it was, the two pieces themselves. And that's what I think that's what artists do.
And often that's an association that only you can make. So I kind of tie that to what you were saying is like you are the one who they're asking for ideas from, because those are your connections that only you can make, really.
Well, yeah, we can't worry about what another sound designer might do in a moment. All we can bring is what we want to do. You can worry yourself to death with what ifs.
Yeah.
You got to go with your gut and
just stand back and ask if it's working.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to another clip. This one we're going to go to Erik Aadahl. Erik was, as I think I mentioned earlier when Ethan Van der Rijn on, he's been on 3 separate times. So he's been on number 35, number 74, number 92. And he sent in a story about how emotionally connected he gets to the sounds he records for films that he works on.
I did the very first season of Family Guy. That was one of my first years being a sound effects editor. In the production with, animators, writers, everybody, there's like dozens, if not hundreds of people putting together the picture. But on the sound end, it was just like you could count on one hand how many people were putting the sound together. I kind of realized like, wow, we've got this amazing power. Sound is half of the experience, and there's just like a handful of people putting it together. There's kind of an auteur feeling to it. And, I'd been recording kind of, since I was a kid, just collecting sounds, kind of like a personal sonic diary. And I started, just picking my favorite sounds that had the most kind of emotional power to me personally. And one of my favorite sound effects creators was, my dog of almost 17 years, Freya. And I put her in every single thing I worked on from the very beginning until she passed away just a little over a year ago. To me, that's what's kind of amazing about sound is it's so personal and so intimate. It works, it's not in the frontal lobe, it just works in the deepest emotional part of your being. It's really special to have kind of this collection of sounds that are in movies that every time I hear them, it puts me right back to when I was there recording it. And my dog Freya, she's going to live on immortalized in film as Bumblebee's emotive vocals, as a Nazi dog in Valkyrie, as, she's been all over the place. So, to me, I think that's one of the most special things about sound is how truly personal it is. And I get emotional every time I think about it. So.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Do you have any sounds that you really connect to that you've used in films, Mark?
Oh, hundreds.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm as much a geek for recording in the field because they're an essential component of great audio. You have to have just like a chef. A chef would never create a great dish without the freshest ingredients. The soundtracks are no different. But Eric reminded me of a story. Gary Rydstrom tells an interesting story. If he hasn't already told you this in an interview, when he lectures, he likes to ask the audience if they were given a choice to have only one thing to remember a deceased loved one by, would it be a picture or an audio recording? And he says almost universally people choose the audio recording. And I'm not a psychologist, but I'm going to pretend to be one because I think sound is so much more visceral. There's something about the way sound talks to our soul that imagery doesn't quite achieve. In fact, because it is visceral, it is actually moving things in your body and it's exciting things in your cochlea. We get a physical sensation from it, and I think that makes it that much more real or close to us.
There's a fourth dimension thing too, I think, because it happens over time. There's something that connects that to a feeling of reality.
Oh, that's so good, Teresa. I hadn't thought of that.
I think I had just a thing recently where my mom passed away a few years ago, and I just found this video on YouTube of her. She used to do some physical therapy stuff, and there's a little clip of somebody working on her. And she doesn't say very much in the video, but he kind of twists her around, and she goes, "Oh." And it's just the way she said it, and she had been very sick before she died, and so she didn't talk much. And just hearing her voice from that healthier time, where she just says "oh" in just that special way that she does it, and I was like, it could be yesterday. I was like, it was complete freaking weird thing where it was just like yesterday. And I think that's kind of like there's something going on in your brain there where it just ties you right back in time.
Well, that's how your memory works too. Your memory doesn't work in still images. It works through motion like that. My dad also passed away recently, and so when we go visit him, my sister, who is not an audio person at all, will break out the phone and play back some voicemails from him. And it's for the same reason. And I guarantee you we're not alone. Voicemails are of people that you love that are no longer with you are highly treasured by most, and it's for that reason.
Back to your question, I don't know that I have any favorite sounds, but there's sounds, kind of like what Teresa was talking about. In the Gremlins movie, my first son was being born, and I hacked into a Doppler, one of those Doppler sonogram deals, and got an audio out. So I recorded the sounds of him in utero, his heartbeat and the blood rushing and all that stuff. And I used those sounds for all the gremlins hatching in the pods. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but there's a great sequence. And it made that I think that subconscious connection that we don't, you'd immediately know, something's gestating inside of those things. So I love hearing that, and I sprinkle sounds of my kids throughout movies. In Lion King, there's the baby Simba. A lot of those utterances are my second oldest when he was born, like little baby coos and things like that. So those always tickle me when I hear them.
I love the idea of you showing up to the ultrasound with your recording kit.
I did that. I totally did that. I recorded it as well.
Excuse me. I'm just going to.
Yeah, I'll be doing this.
I missed on that, but I recorded that child learning speech for a solid 3 years.
When we first started the podcast, one of the first kind of bigger names that we had on the show was Carl Anderson. I don't know if you know him, Mark. And he was, unbeknownst to us when we were interviewing him for something else, he was doing Noah, the Darren Aronofsky film that came out probably like 2013 now. And after we finished the record, he phoned me back to get the right address to send me the audio file. And I had like a 2-week-old son at that point. And I was holding the child when Call phoned. And he was like, how old is that child? And I said, he's newborn. He's brand new. Go down, record it right now and send me the files. I need that because in Noah, a baby is born and they needed brand new baby sounds. So my son is the sound, the crying of the baby in that film.
Yes,
and,
that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I had to go.
It's not just any baby.
So yeah, I was there opening night when that film came out, and it was kind of a flop in reality, but in my family, it's a huge hit. Grandma and Grandpa watch it all the time.
I did a movie a long time ago, a comedy called 3 Men and a Baby, and I had to record a lot of baby sounds, and I pestered all my friends who had newborns, and I recorded them, but the way to do it was I bought Bert and Ernie from Sesame Street? Mm-hmm. I bought hand puppets, and I pulled off their noses and put foam in their place so that I put a Shep's Colette microphone inside the nose of the Bert and Ernie. Nice. And that way I could get really close to the baby, because heretofore they'd see like the big gag ball and they'd just shut up. But when they saw these cute little puppets, not knowing I had a little microphone concealed inside of it, I could gesticulate and tickle them and get the best sounds very, very, very close up.
There you go. That's the genius. Top secret knowledge you get from Mark Mangini.
That really is brilliant.
Bert and Ernie puppet microphones.
Genius.
Okay, we're going to go to our last set of clips. Well, kind of second last set of clips. This is Mildred Iatrou Morgan and Ai-Ling Lee. And they were on our show for episode 90 when they came in to talk about First Man. And this is a couple clips of them talking about how they get super satisfied when they get the approval of a director.
When I review scenes back for the filmmakers, say the picture editor or the director, and I happen to be sitting behind them, and I play the scene back for them for the first time with the sound in there. And sometimes you could see the head like nod, or like they stare at each other and make like a really surprising face, or be really excited about the sequence all over again. It's almost like seeing them who has actually been watching the same sequences over and over and over again for many weeks without the sound that we have, and finally hearing the sequence with the sound in there. It's almost like their reaction almost feels like as though they've seen the scene for the first time. Working with Damien Chazelle, he is always very meticulous, tons and tons and tons of notes, and always takes many numerous revisions to get things right. After every playback, he may go, oh, this is wrong, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. Sometimes he watch it and he's stop the scene and he turned around and he would say, that is so fucking awesome. So moments like that kind of make my day. For me, that's always very rewarding.
So now we got Mildred.
I don't know if it's an actual moment, but I think it was when I learned how to climb into the mind of the director and figure out what does the director really want here, and then blend my sensibility with the director's sensibility and come up with something and have the director say, what I want. So for example, during First Man, there were times when Damien had so much to do, and there were things like with casting, with the loop group people, or choosing takes or whatever, I would normally work with him, but he said, Millie, I don't have time for this, but I know you know what I like, so go for it. So it's moments like that where I feel really happy and I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Getting the director's approval, it feels so good. Especially after you've been kicked 5 times by them.
Well, look, we all want an attaboy. That's just human nature. And I suppose we have to fight the urge to try to play for it. It might, you want to be as honest as you can in your sound preparation. You're not doing it for the attaboys, but they're great when they come.
Yeah, I like what Mildred's saying. You don't hear all of that in the clip. Like, I think she is saying, yes, I want to kind of emulate what the director wants, but she's also talking about her own sensibility and trying to find the meeting place. And I guess that's a very tricky equation.
We all have had the moment when we've run our work for the filmmaker. You know, you've just played back the reel or the commercial or the video game or whatever you work on, and the lights come up and you're ready to take notes. And all too often, that process is one of controlled negativity. It's, this is what was wrong here, this was what was wrong here, this was what was wrong here. One of the great joys of working with George Miller as well as Denis Villeneuve is that they turned that for the first time on its head for me, because they would also give what I call love notes. You know, they'd say at 2 minutes 35, I think we have to lower the explosion, but at 5 minutes 15, those ambiances in Wallace Corporation, fantastic. So you'd get a note that was telling you you did well, not that there was something that needed to be repaired. God bless them for that. I wish more filmmakers would take heed of that.
Right? So as you know, when you're interacting with directors on that level and you're trying to find the voice of a film, how do you decode some of the thoughts and notes that are coming at you on the front end as you're trying to find the voice of where you're at?
Well, it's a twofold process of trial and error. You know, I'm going to assume that I understand everything that they said the first time they say it to me, until such time as I present what I thought they meant and they said, no, that is not what I meant. Great. Oh, you know what? When you told me this, I read it as that. So next week, I'm coming back. This is going to be different. This is going to be great. So, you know, there's a bit of a dance that goes on for a week, a month, or whatever, as you develop. You know, it's kind of like dating, really. You think you're reading your partner pretty well, and we're all adults, and 90% of our first impressions will be correct, but there's that 10% that aren't, and you make some mistakes, and and your filmmakers understand that. They know you're not perfect either, and they want to get to a common language. And that's why smart directors come back to you, because we've all heard it a million times. We have a shorthand. I'm putting that in air quotes, because you've developed it through hardship on the first project. Thank God we got that out of the way. We got all our, you leave your socks in the bathtub. Oh, wait a minute, I don't like the way you squeeze the toothpaste. We got all that out of the way in the first 6 months of dating. Now we can concentrate more on the important aspects of our relationship. Look, I'm pretty aggressive at the beginning of a project, because I've read a script and I'm brimming with ideas. So I'm gonna come into a first meeting and throw a whole bunch of ideas at a director right off the bat, because I wanna get some strikeouts right away. I wanna swing and miss right away before I spend a lot of time on an idea. So I'll present 10 crazy ideas, and the filmmaker might knock down 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them, or maybe all of them. And then I can go back and realize, oh man, he and I are not seeing this movie the same way. I got to reorient. I didn't see this movie this way. That's kind of part of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Just reps and trial and error as much as you can on the front end.
Yeah, but look, after 43 years, I wear all my mistakes as scars on my body. So all those scars inform the parries I'm going to make with my sword. So I don't say this egotistically, but at 43 years in, my first blush ideas are probably going to be pretty close, because I asked the dumber questions 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and I know not to go down a certain kind of road with a certain kind of filmmaker. And it doesn't hurt, by the way, before an interview to go study that filmmaker's work. Go watch and listen, so that when you come in, I can tell you, filmmakers are so impressed when you can tell them what you think their style is, because they just love that you actually cared and went and listened, and then you want to talk about that. That makes them feel like, this guy, I'm important to this person.
Mm-hmm. That's great stuff.
I had a situation with the playback with the director many years ago that is not directly related to what we're talking about, but I was going over it with the other person that was in the room at that time the other day, so it's fresh on my head. The director, it was an animation, and in it there was a very small creature with wings. And we had designed sounds, really high-pitched sounds. And the director was an older man, and he came in and he sat down, and we played it for him. And he was like, well, you got to put sounds for all of the creature there. And he just lost all the high end of his hearing, and he couldn't hear what we had done. But I didn't realize that immediately, so I was just like turning it up. Like I was like, oh, okay, we'll make it louder then. And that did not help at all. It was not getting to him in any way. And then we were like, oh, okay. And we basically ended up going with our first iteration. But yeah, it was a bizarre couple minutes where we were just like, what do you mean? It's right there. Everybody else in the room could hear it perfectly fine.
So how did that director get around hearing it if you stuck with it and he couldn't hear it? Did he think there was a hole in your track?
Well, we added some other sounds that he liked a bit, but for the most part, it was trust.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well done. That's an attaboy. You get an attaboy, Tim.
That's a weird one. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to play one short clip. Someone that you know well, I think, Mark Mangini, Dave Whitehead, sent in...
Oh, he's the best.
We were talking earlier about kind of mentorships and getting the attaboy a little bit. Dave Whitehead might have been the attaboy for this podcast, eh, René?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we had done probably 20 episodes. It says in my notes probably which episode. So he was on episode 27, and he was the first kind of big name that we had on the show, and we had a lot of fun in the interview. He is a wonderful guy, and we just got along with him really well. And I feel like when that interview was done, I don't know if you felt the same way, René, but I was just like, we can do this. Like, we can really make some noise here. And then we started going after, instead of just staying within our friend group and social media group, we started going after names that, like yourself, Mark. So Dave Whitehead means a lot to this podcast. I think that's fair to say. And I asked him to send in a clip, and everybody else's clip is like a minute, 2 minutes. He sent in 22 minutes. I don't think he does anything half-assed. I think he's all
Never.
in. Yeah. So we're going to play a 1 minute clip now and then just quickly talk about it. And then after we wrap up, we're going to play the entire 22 minutes unedited because it's an awesome... listeners, go get a cup of coffee and sit down and just pretend like you're hanging out with Dave Whitehead. So first we'll just play the 1 minute clip here.
We've got films coming up in the future that I know I'm working on, and when they're kind enough to send me visual cues or visual information or concept art, that's a real joy too, because you get involved in the process of making the film. You become a filmmaker, not just the end of the chain. To become part of the film early, it means more to you that way, I think. The thing I always have to remember, and I get quite emotional thinking about it sometimes, is that directors and producers, they entrust you to come on board to create that other dimension to their film, bring that sound world to life, and it's a gift. It really is. You've got to honor that thing that they've given you. Sounds all very deep and meaningful, but it should be. I mean, you're trying to find the emotion in the film. You're trying to find a rhythm in the pictures. You're trying to find space where you can. It's nice when they allow you to actually let the thing breathe. To me, is still what matters, and is still what brings the joy for me for a film.
There he is. It's good to hear his voice again.
That's just beautiful.
He's one of the great sound designers and sound supervisors of the world. I've collaborated with him on, I think, 5 films, and it's been a joy. And, he's so right. I'll tease you a little bit. Dave and I are going to work together, along with Theo Green, to design Denis Villeneuve's new movie about a movie that has a lot of sand in it. And
what could you be referencing?
And Denis has been engaging Theo and I since the script phase. He's shared conceptual artwork and early, previs, storyboards, things of that nature. And they're shooting now, and we're getting to see early dailies. And all of that is, we don't come on for another 3 or 4 months, but all of that is kind of fermenting in our brains. such that we will have a very, very clear grasp of the style and the type of movie he's making by the time we hit the ground to start creating sound. And David will be working on it with us, and I have been sharing all that early work so that he too can be, it makes you feel like we're trusted. We are part of the filmmaking team. I have a director that I work with regularly, Gavin O'Connor. I'm on a film currently with him, and he's rung me while he's writing the script and asked me, or posed the question, Mark, I'm in this scene. Here's what's happening with these characters. I'm having trouble finishing this scene. Is there anything that sound can contribute that might add a component to this scene that helps make it more powerful? How great is that to be in the screenwriting, a contributor in the screenwriting phase? And Gavin continues that. I'm always involved in pre-production. I'm working with production sound. I'm designing sound during the edit. And then he always gives me a great length of time to do a proper post.
That's really amazing that someone's in that headspace enough to call up to call up sound and to call on sound to help with the writing. So some of the best scripts really do have a lot of sound notes in them, for sure.
Yeah.
And how intelligent to start the collaboration that early.
This is not a new idea, but Gavin's just a very intuitive man. He's also brought the composer on during production. Not necessarily a new idea, but still a pretty novel idea, and certainly not one that's traditional or even accepted by the studios. And Gavin was even told by the studio, it's not going to work. You're going to waste your time. And yet, since the very first assembly of the dailies, we've had music that Gavin's been digging and wants in the movie, and that's informing the edit, and I'm designing against that. I'm not even on the project yet, and we have score that is already landed and is in the movie, and it fits the movie so organically. I think we'll see this as a model moving forward.
I hope so.
You think that's a cure for the tempitis that hits so many composers?
It unequivocally, it absolutely eradicates tempitis because it's the composer you want and the music that they want to write. There's no room for somebody else's music.
Yeah.
Now, the flip side of that is you're on a project for that much longer, and does your fee cover your 9 months of involvement instead of 10 weeks?
Right.
The traditional 10 weeks of composition time. You have a choice to make.
It's kind of what we're talking about, is like having at the very inception of the ideas to have people to start to think about sound and how they can bring that into the process earlier. And so I think that's kind of like partially why we do this podcast, is to try and put that message out and also make sound people feel like what you do is important,
For sure. Well, Mark, thank you very much for joining us today. I think this is a really great talk, and I got a lot out of it myself. I hope everybody else did too.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tim and Teresa and René. It was an honor to be with you guys.
Thank you very much. So now we are going to throw to Dave Whitehead's epic 22-minute stream of consciousness about the wonders and brilliance of working in sound. Take it away, Dave.
Sort of been asked to talk about what brings me joy in sound design, or the good parts of the job, and which are many. I mean, I guess if you go right back to the start when I first started off, and I was working at the University of Waikato in Hamilton, New Zealand, and they put me in a little room with a Mac Plus and Proteus, and then a 4-track cassette recorder and a Roland U20, and they said, start writing music for these television, little university television productions, and it was terrible stuff. I didn't know how to quantize things, and I wasn't that good at working to click tracks and all that sort of thing, and it's not really sound design, but it was sort of like really good building blocks for me for starting to put together sound colours. And when I got given an Emax 2 and Sound Designer, the software, when that first came out, that was amazing. But I remember just sort of at stages thinking, wow, I've got all this gear in front of me and I get to play with this. And it's a long way from sort of coming from my house where, Mum helped me buy a 4-track cassette recorder when I was coming out of high school. And it was just joy, just making sound, making music, recording things, putting reverb on it, delay, flange, so I was definitely attracted to that stuff very early on, but it was more in the musical context, and the sound part of it came later on. But I think it's really funny thinking back through your life and thinking, how did I get into sound? And like I was always very conscious of sound, I have to say. Like when I heard the Beatles back in USSR when I was a kid, maybe 5-6 years old, and that the aeroplane at the front of the song, I love that. It was amazing. Or the treatment on David Bowie's voice for The Laughing Gnome, or I don't know, it's funny, I guess, you just had an affinity for that sort of thing very early on. And Dad would go fencing, and he worked as a lumberjack sometimes, or as a out fencing on farms and hitting the wires and the sounding like lasers. And then along came Star Wars. And I'm sure for most people who work in sound, the moment that spaceship came through in Star Wars in the late 70s, and that was a moment for me going, wow, the best sonic thing I'd heard in my life. And I do have to say, like, the folks at Skywalker over the years have constantly sort of delivered soundtracks that have really inspired me. When I got my first feature film, I'm just rambling here, but yeah, when I got my first feature film, it was called The Ugly. And I'd done some short films before that with my good friend David Lowndes. We went into business together, and our mums gave us $10,000 each to start this business, Theta Sound Productions. And that was a huge deal because my mum didn't have money, and it was sort of like my father had passed away and she gave us this money. We paid it back, by the way, but in the first year we earned $5,000, just $5,000 for the two of us, to survive. And it was terrible, but we had such fun, and we were writing music for jingles. We started doing short films for the university, or the Polytech sort of courses there, and they'd have to make short films for their assignments, and we decided it was a good idea to try and get in cahoots with them. And from there, and it's advice I give people nowadays too, it's like if you want to get into doing feature films, start working on short films, because one of the 30-40 short films that you work on, one of them might actually move ahead and start doing feature films. So that kind of proved true for myself anyway, because I was offered the feature film, my first film, The Ugly, as I was talking about before. I remember getting told that I was going to get to be sound designer on this feature film. And I jumped for joy. I was so happy. I had to move city from Hamilton to Auckland, and that was a big deal for my family. I've got 2 kids, and it was hard to sort of upheave and sort of go up there. But that was the start of a new life, really, and started working as an effects editor / sound designer on a lot of films up there. But then the big thing for me really was being offered Lord of the Rings. I got to work with Mike Hopkins, the late awesome Mike Hopkins. He was dialogue editor / one of the best violence editors I'd ever heard, and vehicles as well. He was an amazing effects editor. But anyway, we did this film called Heaven, which was the director of The Ugly, the first film I did. It was his second film. And really hit it off. He sort of thought at the first, who the hell's this cowboy coming in, who's he think he is, sort of thing. But we hit it off, and my thing's always been experiment and just really trying to find something unusual for a soundtrack, and for that reason we hit it off. It was really, really cool, and became a real life friend. But anyway, so he ended up, because he'd worked on Frighteners and all that sort of thing, he ended up offering me a job on Lord of the Rings, and that was just amazing for me. It was a real turning point. So we again up and left Auckland and moved to Wellington. But before that, coming back to the whole joy thing, I remember doing a short film, and that was called DELF. It's called DELF, D-E-L-F, Digitally Engineered Lifeforms, for James Cunningham and Paul Swedell. Anyway, when I went down to Wellington to mix it with Mike Hedges, I was sort of in the coffee room, sort of looking around, and there were these sheets there, these mix sheets, and they happened to be from Frighteners. And basically I'd been winging whatever I was doing up to that point, and I sat there. It was at lunchtime, I think. I was waiting for them to come back from lunch, and I looked through these sheets of Randy Toms and those guys, and I finally got, all of a sudden they had tyres on one pre-dub, and you go down and they had the engines. Oh my gosh, they split them. It was like a real revelation. I mean, I'd really not been taught by anyone to do any of this. We just sort of winged it and got told off when we turned up with the wrong stuff. But you're sort of in New Zealand, and there wasn't really an education option for me. Well, I don't know. I already started doing sound design for films, and so it didn't seem like I should go and do a course at that point. But that was amazing. Like, just in a few minutes, looking at those sheets, and I got it, and it kind of really helped me understand how to lay out my material better for film. I mean, that was so thanks, Randy and co. That was pretty cool. But then, listening to that film and watching it as well, and it's amazing how proud New Zealanders were of that sort of thing. I don't know, I was anyway. I just thought, wow, this came out of New Zealand. And so it was cool to work for Peter Jackson and sort of have that opportunity to work on his films. One of the coolest things that, there were a few things about Lord of the Rings that I thought were really cool. Number one, it was just an amazing playground, and getting to listen to David Farmer's sonic footprint was a real treat. Getting to work with Chris Boyes was a real treat. Meeting the crew that I'm working with now, Brent Burge, Hayden Collo, Justin Webster, Katie Wood, Mel Graham, just all that bunch of people, life friends, and they've all grown, and some of them have gone to the States now, and I think films, the main thing for me is the friends that you make. You spend more time with them than you do with your family sometimes, and that can be really hard. It's hard to be in sound sometimes because you spend so much time away from your family and your friends and that sort of thing. But yeah, so you have to make that time count. If you're going to be there, you might as well be there, giving your all. But yeah. Rambling. Where was I going? Lord of the Rings. Yes. So I actually quit the first Lord of the Rings, or I was offered to do it and I turned it down because I had just some family things going on, and it wasn't good. It was actually, my kids were young and I really wanted to spend more time with them, and so I ended up working from home on another show for a while. But they got really stuck with what they were doing. They had so much to do, and they offered me the first 10 minutes of Lord of the Rings, and it was a real treat. I mean, basically, the first thing that rolled out gratefully was material that I'd worked on, and it was the first time I'd mixed with Chris Boyes. Rocked up, and there's that big sub bender at the beginning when Sauron gets his finger chopped off, and that was one of my most fun sound moments ever. I think I drove Barry Osborne and his I think Carol Kim, his partner, was next door as well, and must have driven her nuts playing this sub bender over and over. Not because I was trying to tweak it anymore. I was just so happy with that sound. I thought it was really cool. But that was a real moment for me. And then I saw it with my family in Australia at a cinema. And I remember standing up and almost throwing my hands up in the air because it was such a cool sound. So, you know, what else? Helm's Deep. Brent Burge and I jammed through. I mean, Dave Farmer provided amazing material for the orcs. I mean, he really did. He had a real handle on what they were meant to sound like, and, you know, sea mammals and that sort of thing. And he provided an amazing palette for us to start with. And then I got to chop with the orcs, and I actually did an entire first pass on the two towers before the team started. So I did a pass on ambience, pass on all the violence, and did something like a 3.5 hour version or something. So that was pretty cool, baptism of fire. And then Brent and I got to do pretty much Helm's Deep together, that battle, and that was fun. I mean, I'm very, very proud of Helm's Deep. You know, right from the rain falling on the shoulders of those guys right at the beginning, that's the sound of the rain falling on the chimney of our house in Auckland, and, you know, it's just those little sound things that, you know, or, you know, when the orc gets shot with the arrow and he falls over, and it's the sound of my coal bucket going, and you know, a dog sort of sound when he falls down. Yeah, it's pretty fun. You know, us guys all stomping on a whole lot of scaffolding, sort of connecty bits to get the iron marching, all the orcs standing there with armour, and, you know, it's such fun. I learnt a lot from Ethan van der Rijn and Tim Nielsen, and yeah, I mean, Tim's ability, his ambience, I just thought was beautiful. I learned a lot sort of listening to what he did in the ambience department, and Ethan was really giving with his knowledge, and yeah, he would always come and review my stuff, and I guess, you know, I definitely consider him and Mike Hopkins real true mentors, who really freely gave advice and, you know, that sort of thing. But anyway, blah blah blah. But yeah, that joy of recording together, you know, going out and actually recording something fresh and new, to me, is still what matters, and is still what brings the joy for me for a film. Just the other day I was in Sydney for my wife Shell's dad's 70th, and, you know, we're outside and the cicadas going off outside, and I have to grab the little M10 and run and start recording it, and I'm going to use it for a little sci-fi creature that I'm going to do today, I think, actually. But you know, it's that whole grabbing something on the fly, and thinking forward too. Like, you know, you've got films coming up in the future that I know I'm working on, and when they're kind enough to sort of send me visual cues or visual information, or, you know, art department, artwork, that sort of thing, concept art, that's a real joy too, because you get involved in the process of making the film. You become a filmmaker, not just the end of the chain. To become part of the film early, it means more to you that way, I think. The thing I always have to remember, and I get quite emotional thinking about it sometimes, is that you know, directors and producers, they've been on the film that you're working on for years before you start, and they entrust you to come on board, to, you know, create that other dimension to their film, you know, bring that sound world to life, and it's a gift. It really is, you know, and it's sort of like you've got to honour that thing that they've given you. Sounds all very deep and meaningful, but it should be. I mean, you're trying to find the emotion in the film. You're trying to find a rhythm in the pictures. You're trying to find space where you can. sometimes, some directors don't let you have space, and I've had that quite a bit, where they already know what they want, and that's fine. It's their vision too, but it's nice when they allow you to actually let the thing breathe. Don't fill it up with too much music. I love it when it comes together. I love the mix. I love when they finish as well, even if you've been, I think the worst, not worst experience, the one of the experiences I had, we were working 119 hours, was my worst week, and people break under those conditions. You shouldn't work like that. But when you come out of it, all I remember is, hugging a fellow crewmate because they were down, and that family vibe of coming together. Sound crews like an extended family, and I think just don't think about the money, think about what you're creating. I mean, it's important to get paid, of course, but I think, the first bunch of short films, I wouldn't have been paid for very many of them at all, and I'm very proud of a lot of that work that I wasn't paid for. It's about the experience and about sharpening your tools. I mean, the other thing I'm very proud of, and the thing I love so much, is when you teach people, when you train people. We're working with some young people at the moment. I'm trying to train them up, and but I'm very proud of Rowan Watson. He's amazing. He's in the UK doing stuff. Just recording his own sound libraries and doing his own thing, and he's got amazing ears. Justin Doyle is at Skywalker now. I'm very, very proud of him. Shell Child, my wife, she's amazing. She's doing some really cool stuff. It's really cool just seeing people grow, and their ears get better and their ability to deliver stuff. And I love, when I don't know how people make a sound, it's just like, how the hell did you do that? I do get joy watching other people's films. I don't actually judge them too much. I have the ability to sort of watch a film and sort of just take it for what it is. Someone's creativity, laid bare for everyone to criticize if they want. It's good to just chill out, watch the film, try and remember what you loved about it, not so much about what you hated. But anyway, good luck to everyone out there in the sound world. I know there's a lot more competition nowadays, and a lot of people can sort of work from home, and the gear is amazing, the plugins are amazing, but less is more sometimes. I remember when I started out, I had an Audio Media 3 card and just the standard plugins that came with Pro Tools, and probably a few. I had like EQ, was it Q10 and the L1, but I didn't have much more, and just with a microphone recording the perfect element to put in the perfect place. And worldizing stuff is amazing. I still love to worldize now, and people laugh at me sometimes for not using a plugin chain where I go out and blast something in the world or whatever, but it's like, well, what's it for? I want to have fun. I want to go out and I want to try something. I want to make a mistake. I want to do something wrong. I want to try something and laugh at it because it just sounds stupid. But I'm out there doing something and trying to make my life more interesting by experimenting. One last thing, which I thought was really cool. It was the one big eureka moment we had. Well, we had a few, but it was Chappie, and we got the VFX data and straight from the VFX company, and a good friend of mine, Dave Lowndes, the guy I got the loan from my mum with years ago, he wrote this little piece of software that converted the VFX data into MIDI, and we sat there looking at the numbers, and one day, and I remember sitting bolt upright and figuring out how it could be done, and he made this bit of software. So Chappie was a real joy for me, even though I didn't end up staying on the film and finishing it off. Steve Boddicker did, actually, I think. Shell did all the, Michelle Child did all the, ended up editing Chappie's stuff, but it was all VFX data totally created Chappie, and we just created sample banks that it was triggered from. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. That was a cool process. I just enjoyed that. Robot was created from data, which kind of really fit the whole theme of the film. And anyway, that's that whole experimental thing. It's just, experimenting is key. Sharing ideas with people, and just using your brain before you use the internet is a cool thing too. But anyway, peace and love to everyone out there. I hope you all have some great experiences in your sound life, and in your lives in general. Cheers.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, René Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop with Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button. Thanks for listening.